The Gundam franchise has been around since 1979. Before we get to the main subject of this video, there's another game I want to discuss first. A game that released earlier and has a lot of similarities to the game I'm going to be talking about. Released for the 20th anniversary of the franchise, and exclusively for the Sega Dreamcast. Gundam Side Story, Rise from the Ashes, developed by Bandai. Now, in the Japanese version, you get a code when beating the game. Sending this code to Bandai will in return give you a Gundam Side Story Premium Disc, which had a mission where you could fight Amuro and his team. You could unlock various mobile suits from this mission, and if you do well, Amuro will give you a compliment. This was sort of a Gundam pilot simulator, much like the Saturn games before it, but the Dreamcast game was the last in the series, outside of a compilation game for the PS3 that added an extra game called Side Story Missing Link, which apparently is not very good. You can check out this review link below if you want to know more about it. But there hasn't been a new standalone Side Story game since 1999. Which is where the main subject of this video comes in, as it almost feels like a sort of successor to the Side Story series. Mobile Suit Gundam The Ace Pilot. Well, about the title, the translation I get is The Warrior's Trajectory, and on the box it says The Pilots Locus, which is just kind of a weird title. But a lot of fans seem to call it The Ace Pilot, and I just think that sounds best. The game released March 18th, 2004, only in Japan and only for the Nintendo GameCube. The GameCube didn't get any Gundam games in the West, and Japan only received 3 games. While Gundam vs. Zeta Gundam released in the West on the PS2, SD Gundam Gashapon Wars did re-release on the Nintendo Wii. That leaves the Ace Pilot as the only Gundam game to remain exclusive to the GameCube, and it's never been re-released to this day. There's very little information about the Ace Pilot out there. Here's the entire Wikipedia article. This game is very rarely talked about, so I gotta show it off because I love it. Gundam The Ace Pilot is a third-person action game where you pilot various mobile suits as various characters, and it takes place during the 1-year war between the Principality of Sion and the Earth Federation. This is when the original Gundam series takes place, and that is the main focus of the game, playing as Amuro Ray of the Earth Federation or Char Aznable of Sion. But it also includes various other series. It has Goto from Stardust Memories, a series that takes place years after this war, and you get to play missions that show what he was doing before the show he debuted in, which is really cool. We also have the absolutely amazing War in the Pocket represented, as well as my personal favorite Gundam series, the 08th MS Team. There's also appearances from characters from other Gundam series, manga, and other games. Not all of them are playable, but it's still cool to see them represented. It really comes together to make the Ace Pilot feel like a huge celebration of Gundam as a whole. Well, at least the main timeline, called the Universal Century. The game's controls are actually somewhat in-depth and take some getting used to. Just the tutorial alone was enough to make me want to buy the game without seeing anything more from it. I wanted to give it a try just by seeing the Gundam slowly moving around as its thrusters fire away to gently move and rotate the Gundam in different directions or pushing it forward. So there's ground combat and space combat, but let's focus on space combat first. The control stick rotates the Gundam. While holding the L trigger, you lock yourself into place so you can strafe around. Gently holding the R trigger boosts you forward, and fully pressing it down will make you go full speed. But that also makes your power meter go up. If it reaches the top, the Gundam will overheat, and you've got to wait a short while for it to cool down before you can boost again. Shooting will also make the same meter increase, but only if it's a beam weapon. You press the X button once to lock onto a target. Press it again to switch to another target that's nearby. Holding down the X button and you'll turn off the lock and regain control of the camera. Once locked, you'll be able to strafe around your enemy, and if you lock onto an enemy and shoot right away, your accuracy will be low. But once you're within a certain range and the lock-on turns red, you'll have the best chance at hitting your enemy. You also don't need to do a lot of aiming since the Gundam does it for you, as long as you're locked on. I love the animation work here, the way you can see the Gundam reaching over to try to take aim. It's really cool. You can use the Y button to shoot the Vulcan guns on the Gundam's head, but not all mobile suits have this. You can switch weapons with the Z button and switch to melee with the B button. Melee is super satisfying. I love going at high speeds and slashing into the enemy mobile suit. It feels great. Now when it comes to ground combat, you walk with a stick instead of just rotating, and the R trigger will give you a small forward dash when pressed, and a full press makes you fly. The L trigger makes you pull up your shield, which will break after a certain amount of damage. You can still shoot with the shield up, which is great. There's another really cool aspect to the game, and this is where it really reminds me of Side Story. When you press the start button, you see a map. Here you can select all your teammates and choose actions for them to take. You can just make the move, search an area, attack specific enemies, guard or follow a friendly NPC or yourself, and you can also use this map to select friendly bases or ships to resupply yourself, because you have a limited amount of ammo. You can also get repairs here, but you can't get fully repaired, you only get a sliver of health back. What I like about the move command is that you can place multiple markers that draws out a route for the teammate to take, which again is very similar to Side Story, although I find the controls to be a lot better in the Ace Pilot. In Side Story, the map and command screens are separate, and you can't select a teammate from the map by just clicking on them. You've got to scroll in between them one at a time, and it just doesn't flow nearly as well. Another thing about Side Story is that you can't equip your melee weapons whenever you want. You do it automatically when you're close to an enemy you're locked onto, and I don't really like this choice personally. Sometimes I want to keep shooting, or sometimes I want to equip a beam saber and dash into my enemy. The Ace Pilot gives you the option. Also, since Side Story is a Dreamcast game, you don't have two joysticks. You move with a D-pad and look around with a joystick. It's a little awkward, but if you just focus on locking on and looking left to right with a D-pad, it works okay. But the Ace Pilot doesn't have that issue, since you can freely control the camera with the C-stick. The Ace Pilot has a series of main missions, with certain missions giving you new paths, where you can play new stories. This is how you unlock new characters. Once a character's story is completed, the mission can be played again with any character using any mobile suit you've unlocked. Not only that, but there's a plethora of weapons you can use. You can even choose to go in without a shield if you like the extra challenge. And speaking of challenges, every character also has one hardcore mission. These missions are not canon, but just give you a different objective on a pre-existing map. Some of these hardcore missions can be real challenging. I mean, this game in general is a challenge. It's not easy at all, but once you get the hang of it, I really think it can make for a fun time. There's a bunch of different objectives you can get on missions, and sometimes the objectives will change as a mission progresses. And even then, some missions have multiple ways of beating them, giving the player a decent amount of freedom in how they choose to tackle the mission. Objectives can be either escorting and protecting something, destroying all enemies, destroy a certain base or target, trying to escape from an area without being destroyed, or just surviving for a certain amount of time. The cutscenes in the game are really fun with how they replicate moments from the show really well. Though there aren't any 3D models for the pilots, you only see them in these 2D portraits where they move their mouth and sometimes change expressions. The cutscenes themselves are overall well done and are really faithful to the shows they're adapting. I'm first going to show you a scene from the series 08th MS Team, and then compare it to the game's version of that scene. Something I want to point out is that when you're escorting White Base, you can stand on top of it and shoot enemies approaching. I just think that's cool. Another cool thing is that the loading screens are like mission briefings, which I think is a smart choice. They'll show you what the objectives are and give you some helpful visualizations. I really love this game a lot, but I do have some things to complain about. One of which is the performance. It's got some issues with slowdown and lag. It's not really a big deal for the most part, but there's a few moments where I do notice it a bit. One mission in particular that's already super difficult is also the same one that has the worst lag the game has to offer. I'm glad lag isn't something you have to deal with a lot, but when it's there, it's not fun. The game also features a RPG-esque XP system, where you level up and get points in different categories that help you as you progress through the game. I have mixed feelings about this, since it means that you'll sometimes need to replay old missions to grind XP until you're ready for a new one. For example, Christina only has 2 missions in total, and both of them are really hard at level 1, so I had to grind up a lot on early Amuro missions until I felt I had enough XP. Outside of that, leveling up also gives you new abilities that you can use mid-combat that'll give you stat boosts or other effects for a short time. There are also a few missions that I think are a little harder than they should be. I mean, I got mad at a couple of them for sure, mostly just the later missions, but I have been able to beat all of the main missions to unlock everything I cared about. Overall though, I really love this game. There's a total of 15 characters to play as, 25 mobile suits, a huge amount of weapons, and a total of 83 missions plus 2 tutorial missions, so 85 if you count that. And any mission can be played with any pilot using any mobile suit. The only exception is that mobile suits like the gun tank do not work in space, and you can place young characters on Federation missions and vice versa. But still, there's so much replayability because of all the mobile suits and characters that you can play on all these different missions. And some mobile suits and weapons are locked behind getting an S rank for certain missions, which is why I still have some content left to unlock. I also love that the game lifts a lot of its music directly from the show, and overall the soundtrack is really great. It fits super well, and so is the sound design too, with plenty of iconic sound effects from the series in place. Most of the voice casts are also the same as the shows. Turns out the voice actor for Sayla Mass reprised her role for the last time in this game, and the end credits even mentions her passing. Gundam The Ace Pilot never received a continuation, and it's hardly ever talked about, but I think it's absolutely worth a go. It'll give you a good challenge, but also a good time. It's a fairly satisfying and fun game to play. While it's got some issues, it's absolutely worth a try. The game usually sells for around $15 complete in box. I use Swiss on my PAL GameCube to get the game running. Despite the region differences, it works perfectly. And although the text on the memory card is a mess, you can still save just fine. If you're wondering about the language barrier, there isn't that much to it, but I have linked a guide in the description that helped me figure out what to do in certain missions. It can also be good to have the Google Translate app on hand just so you can figure out what some abilities do. But other than that, there's not much of a barrier to be concerned about. If you're a fan of the Universal Century, and especially of the 1 Year War, I think this game is absolutely worth a try.